Okay, this is 200 years old, a reminder, so you can't take, we may have learned a few things over the last 200 years, right? And things like beer, just because I read them in here doesn't mean I drink beer or anything like that. Like it says here, a pleasant drink, and I may not consider it pleasant though, right? Made with malt and hops. It is distinguished from ale by having a greater quantity of hops, whence it is more bitter and will keep longer. And beer that is made of the highest dried malt has the name of porter. Much has been published for the direction of those who undertake large breweries. It is much to be wished that many such were carried on in this country, where barley for making malt can be so easily raised. The use of ardent spirits, which are more costly and less wholesome than beer, might thus be lessened. They who are disposed to undertake brewing may supply themselves with volumes on the subject. I shall only undertake to direct farmers who may be disposed to brew beer for their own consumption. Almost any householder may brew, without putting himself to much, if any, charge for an apparatus. Instead of a large copper, which is necessary in a brew house, a large kettle or two may answer the purposes of heating the water and boiling the wort. Hogshead and barrel tubs and other vessels may serve for mashing tubs, backs, coolers, and tuns. The water used for making beer or ale should be soft, and such as is fit for washing, for this will better penetrate the malt and cause it to discharge its spirituous virtue. Some recommend throwing a spoonful of salt into a kettleful, which will cause any foulness contained in the water to rise to the surface when it boils, which may be skimmed off. When the water is very good, this will be needless, but let the water be ever so pure, a little bran or malt should be thrown upon the top while it is heating, to be taken off when the water begins to boil. If malt be used, throw it into the mash tub. The design of thus covering the water is to prevent the best, most subtle and volatile particles of the water from evaporating or going off in steam. The water, for the same reason, should but just boil, after which it should not be left to cool gradually, as the evaporation would be too great. But as much cold water should be thrown in and mixed with it in the mash tub as will bring it to the right temper, perhaps about 3 gallons to half a barrel. For the malt should not be scalded, but steeped in water, as warm as it can be without scalding, because the scalding of the malt would rather close up its pores and prevent its impregnating the water with its virtue, so much as it will in a tepid menstruum. It will also render it glutinous and adhesive, so that the water will not have a free passage through it. The cold water should be put first into the mash, and the hot after it. The mash tub should have a cock or a tapping faucet fixed into its bottom, and the whole covered within with a little flat-shaped inverted basket, fastened with nails, that it may not get out of place by the mashing, and a close straining cloth may be put over it. and fastened in the same manner. The water being in the mash tub, one person should put in the malt by little and little, and another should stir it about with a stick or paddle, that it may not remain in lumps. Or fail of being thoroughly wetted. This is all the stirring that is needful, for too much stirring would cause the malt to thicken, so as not to give a free passage to the water that is to pass through it. Some of the last of the malt, instead of being stirred into the water, should be strewed loosely over the surface, to serve as a coat for the rest, and prevent the copious passing away of the spirit in steams. Besides, the tub should be closely covered with sacks or other cloths, that none of the steam may escape. In this situation, it should stand for 2 or 3 hours. Then, with a small stream, draw off the wort upon a handful or 2 of hops into the back, which is placed under the mash tub. Fill with water again and mash. In half an hour run it off. In the meanwhile, be pouring hot water into the mash as it is running. It should be poured in on that side of the tub which is most distant from the cock, or so that all the malt may be washed with it as equally as possible. This water may be almost or quite boiling hot, as mixing it with that in the tub will so cool it as to prevent scalding. Continue thus to pour in water and run it off till you have the quantity in the back which you design for your strong ale or beer. Then stop the cock and fill the grains with a sufficient quantity of cold water. For small beer, or it may be hot if the weather is cold, so that there be no danger of souring. Let it stand covered as before, and boil your first run. When it is boiled smartly for half an hour, put in your hops, and boil it another half hour, or till it breaks or curdles, as it will when it is sufficiently boiled. Or you may put your hops into a thin, coarse linen bag, leaving room for them to swell, and boil them the first half hour in the wort, which I take to be a better method. When your wort is boiled enough, strain it into your coolers, in which the thinner it lies, the better, as it will cool the faster. The next thing is to put the wort into the tun, an open vessel, to ferment. If very fine and clear drink is desired, the sediments in the coolers should be left behind and strained through a flannel bag. For the less of the grounds go into the tun, the purer the beer may be expected to be in the cask, and the more easily fined. That which is intended for long keeping should be almost or quite cold before it is put into the tun, because a slow fermentation will be most proper for it. But ale or small beer, for speedy use, may be put up a little warm. Then stir in your barm or yeast, a pint of which is enough. Maybe that's yeast. A pint of which is enough for a barrel. If the fermentation be too slow, beat in the yeast once or twice, but not oftener, lest the drink should be injured by it. In 2 or 3 days the beer will purify itself by throwing up the lighter parts to the top in a white curled foam, and precipitating the heavier and fouler parts to the bottom. It should then be tapped just above the lees, and having taken off the yeast, the beer must be drawn off into the casks in which it is to be kept, which should stand with the bungs open till the fermentation ceases, and be kept constantly full, not by pouring in that which runs over with the yeast at the bunghole, but with some of the same beer kept in a vessel by itself. Thus it will throw off the yeast and deposit a dreggy part sufficient for the beer to feed upon in the cask. Reserving the yeast for use, bung the cask close as soon as the working ceases. If the brewing be done in October, the bungs should not be taken out till spring. Then open the vent holes, for the coming of warm weather will cause a new fermentation. This being over, keep the cask well stopped till September following. Then fine it with isinglass, first racking it off if it be not pretty fine. But for ales and small beers it may answer well enough to omit the tunning and remove the wort from the coolers directly into the casks, observing to keep them full, that they may purge themselves of the yeast. But beer of the strongest kind takes 8 bushels of malt for a barrel, but a smaller quantity will make a pleasanter and wholesomer drink. The same quantity will make a barrel and a half of good strong ale, or 6 barrels of small beer. Receipt for brewing for a private family. Take 4 bushels of malt, and from 10 ounces to a pound of hops, as you wish your beer to be more or less bitter. Brew according to the above method. You will have 1 barrel of good ale, and another of small beer. For the small beer, half a pound of hops will be enough. Some use the hops that have been boiled before, but fresh hops will be far better and wholesomer. Spruce beer. Take a sufficient quantity of spruce bongs. Boil them in water about half an hour, or till the outward skin or rind peels off. Strain the liquor and stir in at the rate of 2 quarts of molasses to half a barrel. Work it with beer grounds, or emptyings, or rather with yeast. Instead of spruce, some use juniper and prefer it. It is the low species commonly called savin. A little wheat bran should be boiled in this beer to give it a briskness. Molasses beer, according to a method said to be practiced in Philadelphia. Take 5 pounds of molasses, half a pint of yeast, and a spoonful of powdered race ginger. Put these ingredients into your vessel and pour on them 2 gallons of scalding hot, soft, and clear water. Shake them well till it ferments, and add 13 gallons of the same water cold to fill up the cask. Let the liquor ferment about 12 hours, then bottle it off with a raisin or 2 in each bottle. A good household beer. Take a heaped half peck of wheat bran and 3 or 4 ounces of hops. Boil them a quarter of an hour in 15 gallons of clear water. Strain it through a close sieve and sweeten it with 2 quarts of molasses. Cool it quick till it is no warmer than new milk, and fill your half barrel. Warm water may be used to fill up the cask if needful. Leave the bung out for 24 hours that the drink may work, and throw off the yeast, and it will be fit for use. About the 4th or 5th day, bottle off what remains in the vessel, especially if the weather be hot, that it may not turn sour or stale. If the cask be new, or not before used for beer, apply yeast or beer grounds to ferment it. Otherwise, it will not be necessary. The practice which is common in this country of fermenting our small drinks with the sediments or dregs of the same ought to be laid aside, for this is undoubtedly the foulest and most unwholesome excrement of liquor. Practice is apt to reconcile the minds of people to the most absurd and unwholesome things. Would not a man be considered as insane who should take the emptyings of cider and put it into his new cider to ferment it? But how much better a practice is it to ferment our small beers in this manner, with the sediments of small beer? It is true that yeast is also an excrementitious part, but that which is white is evidently far lighter and freer from filth, and contains much of the volatile and spirituous parts. As I had rather receive the breath or perspiration of cattle into my body than their dung or stale, so I prefer the white scum in my drink to the ponderous dregs of liquors. These observations will as well apply to the fermenting of dough. To mend disorders in beer and improve it, the London and Country Brewers gives the following directions. To cure a butt of ropy beer, mix 2 handfuls of bean flour with 1 handful of salt and stir it in. To feed a butt of beer, bake a rye loaf well nutmegged, put it in pieces into a narrow bag of hops with some wheat, and put the bag into the cask at the bunghole. To cure musty drink, run it through some hops that have been boiling in strong wort, and afterwards work it with 2 parts of new beer to 1 of the musty old. This is called vamping, and is a cure for musty or stinking beer. To feed and give a fine flavor to a barrel of beer, put 6 sea biscuits into a bag of hops and put all into the cask. To fine or clarify beer in 24 hours, put in a piece of soft chalk burnt about the bigness of 2 hens' eggs, which will disturb the liquor and cause it afterwards to be fine and draw off brisk to the last, though it were flat before. This will do for a kilderkin or half barrel. To fine and feed butt beer, cut isinglass into small pieces and soak it in some stale beer. Then boil sugar in small beer or ale to a thin syrup and mix it with some of the isinglass beer, which put into a butt of beer, stirring it briskly together. It will fine and preserve the drink well. To recover a kilderkin of stale small beer, put 2 ounces of good hops and 1 pound of mellow fat chalk, broke into a dozen pieces, in at the bunghole, and stop it up close. It will prove sound and pleasant to the last. To fine a kilderkin of ale or beer, and preserve the same sound and pleasant for a long time, take a large handful of hops, boiled in a first wort only half an hour and dried, half a pound of loaf sugar dissolved in some of the ale or beer, 1 pound of chalk broke in 6 pieces, the white part of oyster shells calcined in a clear charcoal fire to a whiteness, and the stems of tobacco pipes that have been used and are burnt again. Of each in powder 4 ounces, put in your hops first with the pieces of chalk, and then mix your 2 powders and loaf sugar in some of the ale or beer. and pour all in immediately after the hops and chalk, stirring them well about with a staff, and bung down. Some put these into ale quickly after it is done working. Others will rack off their October or March beer into another cask, and then put in these ingredients and stir it well with a staff, or give the vessel a roll or two that the bottom may be turned up. You may tap it at a week's end. You will have a clear, wholesome ale or beer. Bees, an industrious and profitable species of insects. Rural economy is incomplete where bees are wanting. The cost of keeping them is nothing. After the house and boxes are made, and the care that is required about them is but trifling, affording an agreeable amusement. There are 3 sorts of bees in a hive. 1, the queen bee, which is larger and of a brighter red than the rest. Her business is to conduct the new swarm and lay eggs in the cells for a new brood, and her fertility is so great that she brings forth many thousands of young ones in a year. 2, the drones, which have no stings, are of a darker color than the rest, and are supposed to be the males. 3, the honeybees, or working bees, which are by far more numerous than the other 2 kinds. A bee house should be situated at a good distance from places where cattle are kept, especially from hog sties, hen and dove houses, and remote from filth and dunghills. Or is that filth and dunghills? It should be defended from high winds on all sides, so far as may be, consistently with admitting the heat of the sun. The house should be open to the south or southwest, and the back side should be very tight, with a tight roof projecting, that driving rains may not injure the bees. If snow lodges upon or about the hives, it should be brushed off without delay. The bench on which the hives stand should be a little canting outwards, that if wet should fall on it, it may run off without entering the hives. Mr. Bromwich proposes that a bee house be boarded in front, and that the back side should consist of 3 doors, which, opened, give a full view of the hives, and give opportunity to assist or lift them. All seams are to be stopped, which would admit insects from which the house is often to be brushed. If the house should be in danger of being too hot, when thus enclosed it may be occasionally shaded with boughs of trees. As winter approaches, all the seams of the house are plastered with clay. In very cold climates the house should be filled with straw to keep the bees warm, watching against mice, and removing the straw in the spring. Cut a hole through the front of the same size as the mouth of the lower hive, and directly against it. Under this passage, on a level with the floor, is a lighting board, at the mouth of each hive, of about 5 inches long and 3 wide. It is a little shelf for the bees to land upon after their excursions, these being separate, not in one piece of the length of the house, is to prevent intercourse between colony and colony, but more essential to prevent mice, snails, and other intruders. These alighting boards are sometimes painted of different colors to direct each bee to his home more readily. A long shelving board should be placed over the alighting boards to shelter the bees in a rainy time. It should be 12 inches wide and placed 9 inches above the mouths of the hives. Broom, clover, and mustard are said to afford bees an excellent pasture, and they appear very fond of the flowers of poppies. Gardens and any places where flowers abound, and especially where there is a succession of flowers through the greater part of the year, are most favorable to them, for they undoubtedly draw the principal part of their honey from the nectaria of flowers. Fields of buckwheat are good, as they continue in bloom for a long time. In Germany, they move their beehives in boats to their neighboring fields of buckwheat. Bees are wont to send out new swarms in May and June. Much has been written concerning the management of them on these occasions, but the new mode of managing them renders all this unnecessary. It is this: let the bee house be made so tall as to admit 3 tiers of hives or boxes, one above another. The hives should not be tall-shaped, but rather broad and short, that they may take up less room. A hive of such dimensions as to be equal to a cube of 13 inches will be sufficiently capacious. Mr. Thorley directs that they should be 10 inches deep and from 12 to 14 inches broad in the inside. If hives be made larger, the swarms will not multiply so fast. An underhive is made with a round hole through the top of 3 inches diameter, covered with a sliding shutter. Each hive or box should have a passage at the bottom for the bees to pass in and out, 4 or 5 inches long and about 1/3 of an inch deep. One of these hives should be placed directly under an inhabited hive, before they are disposed to send out a new swarm. This will prevent the going out of the swarm and save trouble in watching, for instead of swarming, when the upper hive is full, they will build and deposit their honey in the one that is below, and when that is full, let them find another beneath it. They will take possession of the lowermost. It is their manner always to begin at the top and build downwards. For another method of management, see White's collateral bee boxes. When the top hive is well filled with honey, it may be discovered by lifting it, or more accurately by weighing it gently with a steel yard, in a cool morning when the bees are stiff and not apt to come out. When a hive is taken up, there is no need of murdering the poor insects with fire and brimstone, as has been the usual practice. Only drive in the shutter and run a thin long knife round to part it from that which is below it. Slip the hive off upon a smooth piece of board, or slide the board under, and carry the hive into your dwelling house, which you may do in a cool morning without any danger from their stings. Lay the hive upon its side and have a window of the room open. As the sun gets up and the air grows warmer, they will quit the hive and go into the hive next to the place whence they were taken. When you take out the honey, which should be done speedily, the bees that are found among the honey, stiff and unable to fly, should be thrown into a tub of water. They will soon recover their activity and go after their companions. Some practice feeding bees, but, says one, there is but little use in it, because those which have not a good stock of honey to serve them through the winter are not fit to keep. He adds, there are some flocks of bees in the springtime that may seem worthy of our care to preserve, such as have but little honey and a good number of bees, by means of a cold and dry spring. Yet in all probability may prove an excellent stock and may be worth consideration. The best method of supplying bees with food is by small canes, or troughs conveyed into their hives, and beginning in March, when they begin to breed and sit on their young, it must be daily continued till the season affords them ease and provision abroad. Honey is not only the best, but the most natural of all food, and will go much further mixed well with a moderate quantity of good sweet wort. Some prescribe toasts of bread, sopped in strong ale, and put into the hive, whereof they will not leave one crumb remaining. Mr. Thorley advises, when flocks of bees are weak, to double them, which he thinks the most effectual way of preserving them in common hives. He does it by the help of a fume or opiate, which will so stupefy them for a time that they may be handled at pleasure. Having done this, the queen must be searched for and killed, and examine whether the flock to which you intend to join the bees of another have honey enough to maintain the bees of both. It should weigh 20 pounds. The narcotic or stupefying fume is made with the large mushroom, commonly known by the name bunt, puckfist, or frog cheese. It is of a brown color, turns to powder, and is exceeding light. Put one of these pucks into a large paper, press it therein to 2/3 or half its former bulk, and tie it up very close. Then put it into an oven after the bread has been drawn, and let it remain there all night. When it is dry enough to hold fire, it is fit for use. The manner of using it is thus. Cut off a piece of the puck as large as a hen's egg, and fix it in the end of a small stick, slit for that purpose, and sharpened at the other end, which place so that the puck may hang near the middle of an empty hive. This hive must be set with the mouth upwards, near the flock you intend to take. This being done, set fire to the puck, and immediately place the flock of bees over it, tying a cloth around the hives, that no smoke may come forth. In a minute's time you will hear the bees fall like drops of hail into the empty hive. You may then beat the top of the hive gently with your hand to get as many of them as you can. After this, loosing the cloth, lift the hive off to a table, knock it several times against the table. Several more bees will tumble out, and perhaps the queen among them. She often is one of the last that falls. If she is not there, search for her among the main body in the empty hive, spreading them for this purpose on a table. You must proceed in the same manner with the other hive, with the bees of which these are two, to be united. One of the queens being secured, you must put the bees of both hives together, mingle them thoroughly, and drop them among the combs of the hive which they are intended to inhabit. When they are all in cover it with a packing or coarse cloth, which will admit air, and let them remain shut up all that night and the next day. You will soon be sensible. They are awakened from their sleep. The second night after their union, in the dusk of the evening, gently remove the cloth from off the mouth of the hive, and the bees will immediately sally forth with a great noise. But being too late, they will soon return. Then keep them confined for 3 or 4 days, after which the door may be left open. It is convenient to have a pane of glass in each hive, in order to watch the motions of the bees and to know by inspection when is the right time to take up a hive. The Reverend Mr. White says, "In the back part you must cut a hole with a rabbet in it, R-A-B-B-E-T, in it, in which you are to fix a pane of the clearest and best crown glass, about 5 inches in length and 3 in breadth, and fasten it with putty. Let the top of the glass be placed as high as the roof within side, that you may see the upper part of the combs, where the bees with their riches are mostly placed. You will by this means be better able to judge of their state and strength than if your glass was fixed in the middle. The glass must be covered with a thin piece of board by way of shutter, which may be made to hang by a string, or turn upon a nail, or slide sideways between 2 moldings. Such as are desirous of seeing more of the bees' works may make the glass as large as the box will admit, without weakening it too much, or they may add a pane of glass on the top, which must likewise be covered with a shutter, fastened down with pegs to prevent accidents. Be careful to fasten the shutter so close to the glass that no light may enter, for the bees seem to look upon such light as a hole or breach in their house, and on that account may not so well like their habitation.